The most serious problems that caregivers experience, and it's interesting, not necessarily collectively, because every caregiver is different. They come in all shapes and sizes. So I would say that there was probably 4 key areas that seem to be common issues that all caregivers experience. And one is, as a result of their caring activities and the strain and stress, often their health will fail. So really safeguarding the health and well-being of caregivers is one of the key areas, certainly the Canadian Caregiver Coalition focuses on. Another area is really financial difficulties. It's the out-of-pocket expenses. And although in Canada, all our healthcare coverage is covered by the federal government through our tax system, there are a lot of out-of-pocket expenses that are not accounted for. So really it's minimizing that financial burden that caregivers experience. One of the other challenges that most caregivers experience is they really don't know how to provide the care. They've been put in a situation, a mother, a daughter, and all of a sudden they have to be providing this very medical or clinical care within their home environment. So it's really access to information or support or user groups to realize that they're not on their own. And then for one segment of caregivers, and that's the employed caregivers, it's really balancing the caregiver responsibility with their full-time job. And sometimes it's actually managing 2 full-time jobs. So really creating flexible work environments is something that many, many caregivers, certainly across Canada, really require.
Financial insecurity and health and well-being are the 2 significant issues. Less than 30% of primary carers in Australia rely on wages and salaries for their income. So the rest of them rely on government transfer. That's a significant problem because it means they live in poverty. We know that 65% of Australia's primary carers are in the lowest 2 income quintiles. We know that their expenses are increased as a result of the caring role. Their power bills are often a lot greater, their water bills, their medical bills. So we know that they struggle to make ends meet.
The problems that carers face are embedded in their lives. So I think ultimately caring stops you living your life in the way that you would have expected to lead it. And that's not going to be the same impact for everyone. It's not going to be the same disadvantage for everyone. So, for Mary Webster, the founder of the carers movement in the UK, she wanted to work. She wanted to love her family, but she also wanted to have an independent working life. So for some people, that's a real tragedy in their lives when they have to give up work to care. And people who identify themselves with something they're very passionate about, a job they're passionate about, a career they're passionate about, an activity they're passionate about, they just have to give that up. For others, it's an impact on relationships. For others, it's the pain of caring for a disabled child, which is made doubly difficult by the fact that their lives around them are then affected so significantly. So I think caring impacts differently on different people, but that ultimately it stops you living the life you thought you were going to lead.
I think that what I'd call caregiver creep is happening in many countries, and that's where more and more of the expectation of the healthcare system is falling to the family caregiver without the support that caregivers need for that. So people are coming home, people are being sent home from the hospital sicker than they were, with all kinds of high-tech devices, respirators and suctioning tubes and stomach tubes and in-home dialysis. They're being sent home with this, and the family caregiver is being expected to take this on more and more, leave their job perhaps with all of the concomitant pensions, wages, issues that will come down the road for them. And they're expected to do this, but there's not really that recognition on the part of policymakers that we're expecting this of the family caregiver, and we're not recognizing what they need to support themselves.
We would see carers as being very disadvantaged in terms of support, in terms of information and training for the job they're doing, because they are doing a job that society already recognises as a skilled job and trains people to work in that area and pays them an appropriate wage to do it. Whereas the society and the institutions of society, and indeed the health professionals, seem quite comfortable to discharge a person with heavy dependency needs to a layperson to look after them in every way, from feeding to toileting to medication to interventions like dialysis and peg feeding and things like this, with minimum training and minimum support. So they're the issues there. If the carer is in paid employment, they have a huge burden. They may be actually doing what we would call in paid employment 2 full-time jobs. They're doing a full-time job which might be 35 to 40 hours a week for which they're paid, and then they're coming home. Some of them are even rushing home at lunchtime. I worked with a woman in Dublin who spent her lunchtime jumping in the car, going home to give her mother her lunch, assist her to the toilet, grab a sandwich herself and come back to work, and then she went home at 5 o'clock and she was looking after her mother from 5 till she went into work the following day. And the weekends the same. So there are many people in that situations. Also, because of the mobility, there's carers providing long distance care by Skype, by phone, and getting home on the weekends or on holidays and using their holidays for caring work and using their time in lieu and flexi days to try and compensate for what they would love to have time to do, but they can't because they're in full-time work. And they will try to manage that and keep up their full-time work through flexi work or distance work if they're allowed to do it. But there comes a time where many of them have to go part-time, half-time. And some of them will also be faced with the reality of it's either nursing home care or I give up my job full-time.
I think that the collective problems, challenges that carers face today, I would say in Sweden and I guess in other countries too, is that they face difficulties when there are problems with the existing health and social care services that are in place. As you know, in Sweden we've had a very generous welfare model where the state provides from the cradle to the grave, and I'm afraid that really simply isn't the case. It isn't the case in all cases today. There are cracks appearing in the system, and because of that, carers are having to take on board extra responsibility. Of course, we know that even when we have the best well-developed health and social care system in the world, there'll always be carers because that's the nature of our fabric of our society. However, we see that carers are being placed, aren't really having that choice and are having to take on board extra responsibilities, whilst, for instance, combining paid work. We have the third highest percentage of women in paid employment amongst the OECD countries. And of course then it is women that are taking on board those extra responsibilities with adverse effects on their mental and physical health. So I think that is really one of the main challenges. How are we able to maintain the level and the quality of our existing formal care sector? I think that's a major challenge.
I think the main issues facing carers now is that we're moving towards this recognition, but as I've described in the past, carers are very much plumost with words and punished with cuts. And plumost is an Irish word for praised. So very publicly they're praised for the work that they do, and yet they're the very first people who are cut when austerity hits. So, you know, Ireland really came crashing down, our economy came crashing down in 2007. We had our first austerity budget in April 2008. And carers really were, and carers and people with disabilities were seen as the low-hanging fruit. So every bit of progress that we had made in the years previous in terms of building up the social infrastructure, building up care payments, was actually the first to go. So I think that's one of the big issues, that actually we are seen as the low-hanging fruit, if you like.